it's interesting. In the month of January, when we think about January, a lot of times we think blizzards and snowstorms. We also think Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. But how many of us have heard of Cervical Cancer Awareness Month? Well, you might want to turn your radios up for this, especially for your loved ones or yourself, because we have Tamika Felder with us. She's a cervical cancer survivor, and she's here to inform us a little bit about Cervical Cancer Awareness Month. Good morning, Tamika.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And Tamika, we got a history. You
Yes.
and I go back.
We do.
We go back.
Yeah, TV shows.
Yes.
You coming on my teen show, Straight to the Point in
Yes.
D.C.
Yes, and
Thank you. You and Quick.
Yes, I always appreciate you for giving us that platform,
Anytime.
because, I remember going in that studio and just how sharp. I felt like you were like the talent, the producer, if you needed to work your own camera, you probably could have did that too. But it was always awesome to see you work, and you've always brought us up to give perspective. And shoot, I probably don't want to see any of those videos.
No, you were great. Those are actually some of my favorite shows.
Really?
Yes,
I feel like my mind was probably in a whole different era, because I came on your show when I was like just starting. So I was like 23, 24 maybe 25.
And it's so great to see like the evolution, and you're not even done yet. And just congratulations on everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Well, Tamika, you're here for a very big cause. First off, I love the color. Let's talk about the color you're wearing today.
People don't know, for cervical cancer, the color is teal and white.
Yep.
So I'm wearing teal and white, and it really is. It symbolizes that I want to do whatever I can to let people know. You talk about when we, first started doing the TV show. You were 25. When I was 25, 17 years ago, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. As you're 25 and you think you've grown, you know everything. And I look back on that time, and I was a scared young girl. But I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. I hadn't been in to get a pap smear in probably about 3 years. Now, I didn't even know why I was supposed to get a pap smear. I just knew it was a thing as a woman you have to do.
Right.
And then, working in the media industry, you have jobs. You're a freelancer. You don't have insurance. But at 25, I didn't care. I'm like, look,
exactly.
it pays okay. I got enough money to hang out, pay my bills. I'm good. But now at 43, I look at things a little bit differently. So just to back up, I didn't have any symptoms then. I thought I didn't. And I didn't really know anything about cervical cancer. So at some point, I got this boil under my arm, and, I had to go to an outpatient emergency room because I didn't even have a primary doctor.
Wow.
Okay. So I went, and the doctor asked me a simple question: when was your last physical? And I was like, maybe like 3 years ago. He was like, oh, you haven't had a pap smear or anything like that? I was like, no. And I'm going to keep it real. I don't know any woman who thinks, oh my God, it is pap day. I look forward to pap day. I can't wait to put my feet in the stirrups. Like, this is the day all year I've been waiting for. Like, I have traveled around the world.
You're right.
Talking to women.
You haven't found one.
I haven't found one. Not even doctors who do the procedures, right?
That are looking forward to doing the procedure.
So I went, and it's not a fun thing. Like, it's just not. But it's what I call my 11th commandment. It's what we have to do. So a little bit of history about my story is that I said diagnosed at 25. Thankfully, I didn't die, but I lost my fertility. But women still do die of cervical cancer. And we don't talk about it, and meaning we as the general public, because, who wants to talk about, below the belt stuff?
Yeah.
There was a time when we didn't talk about breast cancer. Now it's not as taboo to talk about it. And I hope that one day we can talk more openly about below the belt cancers like cervical, vulva, vaginal, endometriosis, endometrial, ovarian, all those types of cancers. PCOS, those are things that we really, need to talk about. So with cervical cancer, it used to be the number 2 killer of women in this country, right?
Really? Okay.
Or in the world. In 1952, the Pap test was invented. So like most of, our parents, were born or grandparents during that time.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been that long. But in 2003, an HPV test came along.
Right.
So those 3 letters, HPV,
Yeah.
they give people pause.
Of
Because they're
course.
like, what is that? Is that HIV? What is it?
Right.
So HPV is short for the human papillomavirus.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a sexually transmitted infection. Mm-hmm. So I know people will take pause when they hear that. There's stigma, shame, all kind of stuff that will run through their mind. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to tell you something. It is the most common type of virus that is out there. Mm. So you think, well, why haven't I heard from it before? Now, there's a vaccine now, so people are talking about it more, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. And why should people who are listening to this care? They should care because HPV is responsible for about 7 cancers that can be deadly, like cervical cancer. Mm. And in terms of cervical cancer, we're on a good path to eradicating it because we know the cause, HPV. Mm-hmm. We have tools to detect it, PAP and HPV test, and we have a vaccine to prevent it. So I was just in Indianapolis last week where a 33-year-old woman lost her life. She's a young mom to a 9-year-old and a wife, and she lost her life to cervical cancer.
Wow.
Yeah. And so my life has been forever changed. Like, I'm blessed. I have a beautiful stepdaughter who enriches my life.
Hey,
gives me a headache.
You brought her here today. Hey,
yeah,
Zakia.
and it's important for me to, have these life experiences with her. So I'm blessed that I have her. But I would be lying if I didn't say that I look in my husband's face, I see his eyes, his lips, and I want a little version of him.
Right.
Or, a girl with my crazy personality.
Right.
I mourn for that child that I will never have because of my cancer. And so I want other people to know that you may think cervical cancer wouldn't happen to you because of the stigma of HPV. Right. But the truth is most women have been impacted by HPV. They just don't know it. If you've ever had a LEEP procedure, that's because of HPV. If you've ever had cervical dysplasia, if your PAP has ever come back abnormal, that's all because of HPV. Now, the good news is that in most cases, the infection will clear on its own. Right. But we know women, they hear stuff, they don't like to go follow up, they're not proactive with their health, and that's when it becomes problematic. And so for me, I wasn't going to get screened. So had I been going to get screened, the doctors probably would have caught the abnormal cells. They would have given me a colposcopy, a LEEP procedure, cone biopsy, somehow taken away those abnormal cells to stop those cells from turning into cancer.
Wow. If you'd have done those follow-ups, those every year, going in.
Yeah, and so I didn't do it.
Wow.
And I became a statistic.
Wow. But a survivor.
I am a survivor.
That is able to tell such a great story and help educate us. Again, for those of you just tuned in, Tamika Felder is here. She's a cervical cancer survivor. And this month is Cervical Cancer Awareness Month in January. And we're trying to, inform people more about this cancer and about the importance of getting those checkups regularly. And also, Tamika, let's talk a little bit about how cervical cancer affects the Black community and Black women especially, and what you've kind of learned about that.
So like a lot of diseases, Black women, Black people, we are low on that list. There are true healthcare disparities. So when in terms of cervical cancer, Black women are diagnosed at much later stages, which also means that the chances of survival are extremely low. And when we look at that number, we're talking about 50% of cervical cancer diagnosis. So there are 14,000 in the U.S. There are about 600,000 worldwide. So this is a public health issue, seriously, around the world. But when we look at it in terms of the U.S., people think, well, compared to breast cancer and other cancers, it's really low. Right. But there's a new study that just came out through the Mayo Clinic that shows that those numbers are much lower than what they had originally thought. Because even though we have these great tools to detect this cancer, as I talked about the PAP test, women aren't going in to get screened, specifically women of color. Right. And so in places like Alabama, D.C., Mississippi Delta, Black women especially are dying at alarming rates, and we have to stop it. Yvette Wilson, who was on the Parkers, she died of cervical cancer. And there wasn't a lot of talk about it, but these are things that we absolutely have to talk about. And so I'm sharing my voice in order to shift that narrative. When we also think, how can we get women to get screened? There's racism. So there was times when, we could not go to the doctor. Right. We didn't have our own doctors. We couldn't go see other doctors. Right. And so if you look at generations to come, we go to the doctor or use the emergency room when it's a problem. Right. We have to learn to be proactive with our health. A direct of racism is also poverty. And so, in Alabama, there's one doctor for a radius of 5 counties. Wow. How can that one doctor screen all those women? So that becomes a problem. And there's a great resource called the Witness Project that can help African Americans. There's also in every state and territory in the U.S., there is the early breast and cervical cancer early detection plan, because while you're going to check below the belt, you ought to check above the belt too. Right. So we have to talk about those types of things. And then there's access. So we all got to eat, we got to work, and sometimes you get a doctor and you make an appointment, you can sit in there forever. Who has time when they take their lunch break, and who wants to go get a pap smear during their lunch break?
Not I.
It ain't fun. It ain't fun. You know what I'm saying? So we have to think about doctors and healthcare facilities extending hours of operation so we can have evening hours, so we can have weekend hours, because, mothers don't put themselves first. They put their children, their families first. And so they think about themselves last. So there's this great analogy when you get on a plane and they're giving you all the information before you get on the plane, and they say, put your oxygen mask on first. Right. And most mothers wouldn't do that. They would put the oxygen mask on their child first. But you cannot help someone else unless you have the oxygen. And so I always tell people, no, getting a pap test is not fun, but you absolutely have to go do it. It just might save your life. Also, when we ask our sisters, did you get a breast cancer? Are you checking your breast? We need to be asking, girl, did you get your pap smear too? Right. It seems weird. Yeah. But what I said, Black women are dying, and we're not hearing about it, but we're going to start hearing about it more because people are starting to share their stories, and like I've gone around the world talking about this, and everywhere it's taboo. But I've seen the needle just move a little bit, and I'm so glad that you are giving me this opportunity to do this, because I want women to start off the new year in good health. I want them, if they haven't scheduled it yet, to call their doctor right now, well, as soon as they finish listening, and make an appointment to get their annual Well Woman exam. They have to have an annual Well Woman exam, because if you have a doctor that you see routinely, they'll know and they'll catch any abnormality. Your body also whispers to you. So some of the symptoms are confusing, because heavy periods, bleeding between sexual intercourse, lower back pain, leg cramps. Those are things that it could be associated with your menstrual cycle or whatever. So that's your body whispers, but you still need to pay attention to it. And without having a relationship with a doctor, it just puts you in that process to fall between the cracks. And Black women are especially falling between the cracks when it comes to cervical cancer. Wow.
Again, Tamika Felder, we appreciate you for coming in and speaking on this. And, before we started the show, you also talked about how you're helping your stepdaughter, Zakia, like you're having these conversations early. How old is Zakia?
Zakia is 16.
16. So, and speaking of the HPV and the HPV shot, I mean, they were talking about giving it to girls as young as, 12, 13? Or
So it's FDA approved for girls and boys. Okay. Because boys can get, throat cancers. Right. That cancer is going to surpass all the other HPV-related cancers. Wow. So you can get the shot as early as age 9, but it's recommended for 11 and 12. And people are always, I'm not giving my child that because they're going to start having sex. No, it's because kids are, unfortunately, but truthfully, they're having sex earlier and earlier. And so the studies have shown if you get them between 11 and 12, it's before they're exposed to the virus. Because this virus, HPV, is spread skin to skin.
Skin to
so you don't
skin.
have to have penetrative sex. You can have skin to skin, humping around, just, rubbing, all this other stuff.
Like, don't be looking over here. Don't look over here.
But that's why oral sex, that's when we talk about these throat oropharyngeal cancers that are HPV related on the rise. It's because of oral sex. And I am not trying to like diminish anybody's type of pleasure, but you need to know about these things.
Right.
As much as you worry about other stuff, this stuff isn't on the radar. And so HPV can also cause genital warts. So there's over 150 different strains. The strains of HPV that cause cervical cancer are different from the strains that cause genital warts. And so there are lots of, a huge population of people who have to deal with genital warts. And look, this is not, when I was writing my list growing up, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was not to talk about HPV,
This wasn't at the top, not top 5, top 10 maybe.
This wasn't there, but I have to do it because there are so many women, thousands of women in the U.S., who are mothers, sisters, daughters, aunties, besties, who are not alive to share their story. I feel extremely blessed, lucky, whatever you want to call it, to still be able to breathe and wake up in the morning. So I'm going to talk about it until I can't anymore, because I am my sister's keeper, and I don't want any woman to die from it, but especially my sisters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Tamika, we appreciate you. Like, I mean, again, you're a survivor, you're informed, and I love the message that you have and the way that you're able to deliver it. I think it's important for us to see more of ourselves. The more we see Tamika, like you said, it could be intimidating going to a doctor. And so to see someone like you who's so relatable, who can just tell your story about being that young 25-year-old and finding that out, and just your journey in general, I think for people to be able to relate, that gives a little bit of comfort to say, okay, I need to make sure that I'm checking on myself and I'm getting those woman wellness checks. So
and if they need a resource, they can go to our website. We have a nonprofit organization. It's called Survivor, and it's spelled CERVIVOR.org. Survivor.org. CERVIVOR.
Okay.
So cervix.
Right.
Survivor.
I get it. I caught it. Yep. Survivor.org, right? Go there for more information. And I highly encourage everyone, do the research on it, and learn more about it, whether you feel like, even if you just got a checkup and everything is fine, it's always good to do the research and learn about these things. And
absolutely.
And again, like you said, it's not just checking up on ourselves, it's also checking up on our best friends and loved ones and saying, hey, have you taken care of what you got to take care of? So
our mothers, making sure that they are doing it.
I mean, it is a tough conversation to have, though, especially generation. I feel like as the generations go on, we're getting a little bit better as far as communicating. But like you said, you were saying how with your mom, it was like, don't get pregnant. It was kind of like, that was your talk.
Yeah, and you need more than that. You need a lot more than that.
Right, so.
Even when I talk to my stepdaughter, I hate to admit this, but sometimes I'm like, oh God, I don't want to have this conversation.
Yeah,
but I have to.
It's kind of awkward.
Yeah, it is. It's awkward, but that's why we had the website as a tool. So, just send this link. If you can't have the conversation, if you can't verbalize it, send this link.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a great idea. Again, Survivor, that's CERVIVOR.org. Go there. Tamika Felder, thank you so much again. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Protect that kitty cat.
And on that note, this concludes our Kiss in the Community Public Affairs show. You heard it. Tamika told you. Get it right. Take care of yourself.